Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Barrientos. I'm the Sligo Senior Pastor here in Tacoma Park, Maryland. It's so good that you have joined us. Thank you for joining us. Whether you are here in the U.S. or perhaps in another part of the world, thank you for joining us. And I hope that in the following minutes, you are enriched, whether it's a lesson you've already heard before, or perhaps you are already doing, or perhaps there's a spark that gets you going to make sure that there is a culture of baptism that can enrich your entire church. So one of the things that we should always begin with is what Jesus actually said. Go make disciples, right? And you baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to do all that I have commanded. And Jesus' promise then is to say, I will be with you to the end of the world, the end of the age, right? So notice that really the commandment is not that Jesus is saying, you go and do what I tell you. Jesus is saying, this is what we're going to do for our lives, our support of faith altogether. And by the way, you're not alone. And so we have to take that seriously. That teaching, that baptizing, that making disciples are not just steps. They are a package of which can give life, a momentum, a pattern, and also influence those around you. So one of the key things about baptism that we don't often think about is that baptism is the initiation to the abundant life, right? And if we see baptism as the initiation to an abundant life, then perhaps then we're gearing towards momentum. We're gearing towards patterns. We're gearing towards the ability to influence those around us, to be excited to start, to actually support, to sustain a life in the church that can give momentum to communities that may not know what really the church is all about. So if you're having trouble creating a culture of baptism, perhaps the following items can be of help. What I like to suggest to you is that, number one, you study the patterns of your local church. What patterns are those? Well, how much do you give on a yearly basis? What do you do when you have discussions in the board? Is the board talking more about projects, or is it really talking about making connections with people outside of its structure, right? What are the patterns of the year of the local church? What are you doing in the first 3 months? What do you do in the second quarter? What do you do in the third and the fourth? What are the biggest events at your local church? And perhaps reviewing what has actually done a good thing in the local church. Perhaps you did an event 1 year previous, didn't go well. Maybe you did it 5 years ago. Maybe it did go well. Why did that happen? Perhaps learning to see what your local church does in terms of patterns. One of the biggest problems into trying to create a culture of baptism is that we're always thinking about its potential, but rather you should look at the patterns, because it would be very difficult for you to create a culture in which you could not build off of the small things that you already have. Because at the end of the day, working with the local church is really working with the patterns that are already there, either to improve them or to reorient them, right? So study the patterns of your local church. How many people did your local church baptize last year, perhaps the year before? Why is that the case? Did something happen? Go look over your church minutes. What happened during that month that things didn't go well? And retract and think about these things, right? So that you can orient publicly of how to address these sort of issues and patterns that perhaps need better, scheduling, for instance, right? So the second thing would be, aside from just studying in it, if you have a small church, you should think about those who are most influential in the church, perhaps. Gather 2 or 3 that may be your friends or closest to you who are interested with you to make sure that you at least have a baptismal goal, right? Let's say you have no baptismal goal. You just go with the flow. Now, perhaps you can get 1 or 2 other people whom you could pray with on a daily for 30 days, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days, that the Lord is able to increase perhaps either attendance or perhaps someone who might be of interest, who wants to study deeper, maybe getting along with them to make sure that it starts really with prayer, right? At the end of the day, a baptismal culture is not just baptizing a lot of people. That's the wrong point. Is that there is evidence perhaps of growth that has some deep roots of spirituality, in which you are not depending on your ability, but you're depending on what God can actually give to you to support the local church, right? So make sure you pick out 2 or 3 people that could maybe start off with you at a good place, right? The third thing would be perhaps reporting to the local church your findings from the patterns of the church. Guys, we've seen that the past 2 years, we have not done well here because, right? And you're able to put that out for people to see, right? Last year, we did all these things, but we didn't baptize anybody, right? And so perhaps you give a little bit of the issue, a public announcement a little bit, right? Because you want to be transparent about what the actual need is, right? And of course, you're always going to have this argument where, no, it doesn't matter if people don't get baptized, that, people are just coming in, hanging out, and so forth. That's fine too. But you got to realize that if we're taking Jesus's commandment altogether, that the life that we've come to know in Jesus Christ includes discipleship, includes teaching, it includes baptism. So don't be afraid about baptism coming into your lane in that moment, right? But also another thing, you got to think about your church situation as well, right? What about the church currently are you doing in order to create the space of discipleship as teaching and baptism? Do we even talk about baptism at the local church anymore? Do you even give an invitation? Are there groups where people are able to be nurtured? Are there groups for further discipleship? Are there groups for just study? Sometimes our churches could be so, supposed intellectually geared. And I like to suggest that they're not as intellectual as they think. Actually, what happens to be the case is that we're not putting into practice what we know. And so perhaps asking the further question, what is it about what we know that could be used in a very practical form in the local church, like greeters, having someone that can greet people as they come in, as they go out, maybe giving a nice gift, creating the environment where people feel included, right? You do want an inclusive church to make sure that you're able to sustain the life of baptism altogether. The last one, number 5, is quite easy. What about your service is creating the space for baptism to happen? Now, here's one reason why I tell you that. A lot of worship services are geared to different things, either the excitement of music, either to the intellectual reception of a preacher, or perhaps a studious component to something, or perhaps it's just a concert-like feel, whatever that may be. And that's okay, do what you need to do at the local church level. However, what in regards to when it comes to even giving the invitation publicly in the bulletin, on the pew, a little card, or perhaps extending a hand afterwards, having your elders ready to ask, to simply say, hi, how are you? My name is so-and-so. Where are you from? Having personable people being able to reach out to those who might be new to the local church and making sure that there's a connection in one way or another, right? Which is critical to everything that we do, right? Because church service should not just be a place where I get some form of ecstasy with God. The church gets together also because it's also a summons, right? It's a summons. That includes preaching, that includes music, that includes prayer, that includes the announcements. Everything is a summons, right? And if it isn't a summons, it isn't a welcome, it isn't the chance, the opportunity to accept a particular thing, whatever that may be, then what are we doing, right? Then it's just a chat about us feeling good about music, feeling good about how someone sounded. But perhaps if we open the ability in our services to create room for people to make decisions for Jesus, then the conversation changes a little bit. So we are not talking about colonialism. We are not talking about conquering anybody. We are talking about creating spaces where perhaps finances, where perhaps budget orientation, perhaps people are helped to be able to create an environment in which the sustainable life found in Jesus Christ is able to see baptism as an opportunity to be able to grow your church, to give an opportunity to influence those who have never seen it before, but also create momentum in which people can trust your local church as a neighborly church. So I hope whatever that may be, whether basic or not, may be a blessing to you. And thank you for having me. Many blessings on your journey.